We have a remarkable couple joining us. We have Rivka and Shalom Shilangu. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yep.
Okay, great. And Rivka and Shalom are actually Jews by choice, not by birth. They have chosen to convert to Judaism. They live fully religious lives as Jews, but they are chosen Jews. They are Jews who chose to become Jews. And they are going to tell us a little about their life story, their inspiration, how they came to Judaism, what inspires them, what challenges and obstacles they have faced, and how it is to just lead a religious life. Good evening, both of you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thanks for having us.
Hi, Shalom. Hi, Rivka. Okay, so we have a lot of people here joining us. We have people from all over. Ranson, MO, Tampa, Shavua Tov. Thank you all for joining us. Tell us where you're coming from, and we will get started on our program. Very, very excited to have with us Rivka and Shalom Shalangu, who are joining us. It was actually very hard to work out a schedule with both of them because they're both busy individuals, which they'll tell us all about. And we feel very privileged to have you with us tonight and to tell us about your story. So Rivka and Shalom, let's start with, tell us a little about your backgrounds, where you come from, and what made you really choose to embrace Judaism. Shalom, let's start with you.
Okay, and just where I'm from. So I was born in the States. So I'm from Buffalo, New York, or a suburb outside of Buffalo. In terms of my background, so as you mentioned, so I'm a convert. My father, he's passed on now. My father was Kenyan. He was a college professor in Buffalo, New York, and my mother, native-born American, sort of Irish Czech background. And so I grew up in a household that was a basic Christian household, although things were set up in such a way where my father, on the one hand, wanted us to be religious people, believe in God, but he also wanted to give us some degree of space to sort of question and explore things on our own. So up until 8th grade, I did go to Catholic school. I think that was sort of like a precondition to my father marrying my mother. Like, he was actually from a different stream of Christianity. But on the other hand, my father was rather guarded about having taken us through a lot of sort of like the Christian rites of passage, I think, because he wanted to protect us a little bit from an overly dogmatic upbringing. And so that was sort of my basic background. In high school, I went to a public high school, and maybe I can let Rivka give a bit of an introduction as well.
Sure.
All right. So yeah. I grew up in most of my childhood was spent in rural Ohio, and my parents, my mother is Methodist, my father was Catholic. My father has since passed on. I grew up in a similar situation to Shalom. Religion was not a huge part of our lives. I did go to Catholic school, and my father did basically guide the family into Catholicism. And we did have to go to church on Sunday and everything, but it wasn't something that was, I'm going to be honest, it was a very weird upbringing. My mother, on the one hand, was very uncomfortable with Catholicism because she converted to it in order to marry. So she never really believed. And my father, while he would have us go to Catholic school and had us go to Catholic Mass, and he took part in the church all the time, there was an antagonistic relationship with religion with him. So I was getting very mixed signals about religion from my parents, whereas Shalom's was much more like, be more open-minded and be more willing to question. My parents, it was more of a very mixed signal about what religion was, whether it was even good for humanity. So by the time I got to 6th grade, which was when my classmates were all being confirmed into the church, I said, I'm not doing this, and I left. And my parents pulled me out of Catholic school and put me into a public school. And from there, I abandoned religion completely. or at least I tried to. I obviously wasn't very successful. And I decided that I was going to spend the rest of my time, I very much pursued a desperate attempt to be irreligious, to be anti-religious. And so I followed in my father's footsteps a little bit, I could say, maybe went a little more extreme, and became very intensely anti-religious, and was that way for a very long time, up until my late teens. I don't know if you want to pick up with Shalom next, or if you want to go back and forth.
Whatever you guys want.
In terms of my orientation towards religion, I can't say that I ever went through a phase where I had sort of antagonistic or oppositional relationships towards religion. I mean, I think I always had a basic belief in God. It wasn't until college that I think I started to ask more questions, both challenging on the one hand, or kind of challenging whether or not a person has a basis to believe in God, and even if one does, there's multiplicity of religions out there. So are they all equally correct? So I started to ask more questions like that. But that, I think, was more motivated more by just a desire to see what could I actually find some sort of real intellectual grounding for belief in God, or is it something that maybe some people were psychologically disposed towards, and they hoped there was a God, and other people weren't, and that's just kind of how it was. So my father, even though he was a college professor, and to some degree, I think a lot of college professors tend to keep religion at somewhat of a arm's distance. On the other hand, he came from a very religious household. In Kenya, his mother had worked for the Salvation Army. He came from a large family, a family of nine children, excuse me. It was pretty typical for me at home to hear my father say things like, God is great, God is wonderful, et cetera, et cetera. So even though I'm not going to say that I was had a very religious upbringing, in a sense that my father was not very interested in pushing a particular religious worldview on us. On the other hand, I didn't grow up in a household where there was a lot of feelings of antagonism towards religion. So, that's basically how I was. But like I said, it wasn't until college I started to try to explore things on a more mature level, I think.
So it's interesting that you say, like, in college is where you somehow found more about Judaism, or about God in Judaism. Can you tell us a little about that, and who was the ones who gave you direction in that regard?
Yeah, so it's hard to say that there was a single point where I started to ask more probing questions, but I definitely recall it starting in my freshman year. I did have a friend who he was a Jewish friend, very bright guy, who at the time was considering becoming Baal Tshuva. And so we used to get into a lot of very prolonged conversations, about things in general, but the topic would turn to religion. So I do think that there was certainly that played a major role. He was the one that actually ultimately introduced me to a local Chabad rabbi in Buffalo, who he would visit from time to time. I think,
who is that? Could you mind
so it's
me asking?
Rabbi Heschel Greenberg. He's still in Buffalo. He's the head of a Chabad house called the Jewish Discovery Center in Buffalo, New York. So I met him, I think, during my freshman year in college. I asked him a number of questions, and was very impressed by how thoughtful his answers were. Not to take up too much time, but college is also an environment where, for good and bad, you see a lot of kids at that age, or young adults, really questioning and challenging a lot in terms of the upbringing, and that can have, on the one hand, a very negative effect, I think, in many circumstances. But for me, what I was noticing is that I had some peers that I was seeing were either never were raised with my upbringing, or were strained from religious belief. And in college, there's a tendency to intellectualize things a lot more. So, I was in an honors dormitory. I had a roommate, for instance, who was an atheist. And, he was able to provide some fairly coherent rationales, or at least rationalizations for his perspectives on things. So I was in an environment where, unlike high school, there was a lot more of a back and forth, and challenging and questioning one's beliefs in general. And so that was sort of the environment, I think, that kind of spurred me on.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So while Shalom was having his experiences, kind of finding God and connecting to God, I was very much on the warpath against God. I was very, very determined to be an atheist. I consider that to be the ultimate freedom, would be throwing off the shackles of religion. But at some point, I realized that there was this tiny little grain. I always talk about like the princess and the pea, that tiny little pea that you could feel through all those like mattresses, all those layers of anger and hate that I was building up. There's still that little pea that I could not get rid of. And so when I was about 19 years old, I said, all right, well, I can't get rid of you, so I'm going to try to find you. And I really looked into a lot of different faiths. And there was always a grain of truth to every one of them. I was like, oh, I really like that about that religion, and that seems to make sense, but nothing ever really seemed to click. Nothing ever, I don't want to sound corny, but like spoke to me spiritually. I guess that's the way you could say it. It's like, oh, well, that seems to make sense, even though I disagree with that. I could, but nothing was screaming out that that's where I belonged. And it was really by chance that I was in college and I met some Jewish people. I mean, I grew up in a town where I don't think we had any Jewish people. We had one traffic light and we had like 2 policemen, but I don't think we had any Jews. And I met some Jews and I struck up a friendship with them. And before I knew it, I was in Israel and on a trip. And we went to Jerusalem and I was at the wall and I just said, I'm going to convert. Like, I'm going to do this. And you, God, you either take this feeling away from me or let me convert. By then, I had really kind of fallen in love with Judaism. And I have to say that the spark that got it wasn't, yes, I appreciated the philosophy of Judaism. I appreciate the ethics of Judaism. I appreciate the history of Judaism. All of that, but what actually lit the fire was my father was a history major. And when I couldn't find that spark in other religions, I went to just flipping through his books. And it wasn't on any purpose or design. I was just one day just flipping through his books. And I thought, my gosh, the Jews have been through so much. What is going on with this little people? And I noticed that they were never a large group of people. There was never billions of Jews. There was never even 50 million Jews. It was always a small little group. And I was thinking, why is this little group of people always here, even though everybody else has tried to extinguish them? And to me, on some level, I guess maybe on an intellectual level, I had to admit that was beyond nature. That was something was operating with Jews outside of nature. And that clicked. And that somehow spoke to me. And at that moment, I was like, now that I see this, I can't turn away. Like, I can't ignore this. I want to be a part of this. I have to be a part of this. And so, like I say, when I was in Israel, and I really feel it so strongly, and I need to be a part of this people. This is where I belong. And I just begged God, like, you either help me or you take this desire away, because this is torture. This is not, I can't live like this. Let me go back to whatever it was I was before, or allow me to enter your people. And it was maybe about a year or two later that I converted with an Orthodox rabbi. And then I went to Brooklyn. And that's where we met.
What happened? Yeah, let's hear how you met.
Oh, well, so I was learning in yeshiva. I was at Hadar Torah in Brooklyn. And, when I came down there, of course, my intention was to ultimately enter.
How did you get to Hadar HaTorah?
How to get to Hadar Torah? Yeah,
so Buffalo, you were learning, and then you met rabbis, and then what?
Yeah, so for me, the decision to convert was not immediate. As I mentioned, I met Rabbi Greenberg when I was 18. I did, after, he gave me a book that described the Noahide laws. So I was, from the get-go, very much aware that Judaism was a religion that had a universal aspect to it, that non-Jews weren't expected to convert to Judaism. There was something called the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach that I was aware of from the beginning. as I mentioned, I had a friend who was considering Baal Tshuva and was considering becoming Baal Tshuva, and so there were some materials that he was reading on Judaism that I also read as well. And around that time, this is, I think, taking me to my late sophomore year, my college schedule opened up. So the University of Buffalo, where I was attending college, had an early assurance program where you could basically, if you got in, reserve a spot to the medical school there. And so I was fortunate enough to get in. And basically what that meant was that I can take whatever courses I want during the second half of college, because I was already assured of a spot in med school. So with that, I took the opportunity. I enrolled in a number of courses. Among other courses I was taking in the Judaic Studies department over at the University at Buffalo. And the way it was set up over there, actually, there were a number of Chabad rabbis who were actually taught courses there. Probably part of their Kirov efforts, but they were integrated into the Judaic Studies department. So I remember that first semester that I started taking these courses. There was one course in Jewish ethics that I took that was taught by Rabbi Greenberg. And there was another course the title of the course was Hasidic philosophy. It was taught by Rabbi Nassim Garari, another shliach. He was mainly operating on the University of Buffalo campus. And both courses were excellent. I remember with the Hasidic philosophy class, so the layout of that course was that it followed the Rambam, Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith. And so they really try to give a broad overview of Jewish theology, but embedded in each of these 13 principles, Rabbi Garari would also sort of add a Hasidic dimension to things. And I remember that in that class, especially certain discussions, talking about the unity of God, how you sort of relate to an infinite being. I remember having some very intense sort of aha moments, feelings of emotional elation, yes, intellectual satisfaction, but almost this kind of feeling that there was something that I knew was sort of deeply embedded within that was finally being sort of acknowledged or revealed. So it was a very interesting thing. On the one hand, I was learning about Judaism, religion that I didn't know very much about, but on the other hand, I had this sort of feeling of a type of recognition, and it was very intense, I would say, emotionally. But at the same time, though,
it's very interesting. Like you're both coming from different directions almost, but you're both feeling that intense feeling that this is something that I need, or something that I know, or something that's intuitively part of me. Rivka more from a anti-religious point of view, coming to religion, you more from a traditional religious Christian point of view, accepting it, but yet there was something screaming in both of you. That's very interesting, this strong feeling.
I mean, for me, and perhaps this is what caused me, among other things, to hesitate a bit before officially embarking on converting, is that I kind of thought to myself that maybe how I was responding to this is simply how a human being responds to confronting basically ultimate truth, that wasn't necessarily indicative that I was somehow predestined to be a convert to Judaism. Maybe this is just what any human being would feel if they come into contact with the MS, basically. And so I did take some more classes, and so part of my college degree was in Judaic studies. There's some other coursework that I did as well. But I do recall as college was coming to a close, yes, there were times when I would accompany this friend of mine to Jewish services. But I remember sort of feeling that as I was going to go on to medical school, that maybe I would just be so preoccupied with my work and professional development that I began to fear that maybe I would not have as close a tie with Judaism and the Jewish people as I felt that I was able to have in college, where I had a lot more leisure time, basically, to kind of go on this sort of personal exploration. So in college, in my year, it turns out that I met somebody and became friends who himself was thinking about becoming Baal Tshuva. So his situation was that he grew up in the Ukraine, grew up in a rather atheistic culture. He himself had been one, but when he came over to the United States, his parents, for whatever reason, decided to have him go to yeshiva. They had him go to Chaim Berlin. He tells me that you'll secretly still an atheist through through yeshiva, but I guess like there was an interest that both he had, maybe his parents had, in trying to figure out like why was it that people were so hateful and anti-Semitic towards us back in Ukraine. Like say, you know, what is it about Judaism or the Jewish people or whatever? But in college himself, he went to NYU. He started to kind of reconsider and was actually interested in getting more involved in Judaism. And I kind of thought to myself, like, you know what, this is an excellent excuse for me to start going back to synagogue, because this guy would basically be like my hero project. So I kind of introduced him to people in Buffalo, and so I would accompany him a lot of times, like on Shabbos, like say, and people, if they thought, what's this non-Jewish guy doing here? I was just like, well, I mean, you want my friends to observe like mitzvahs. So things kind of proceeded basically like that. But as I was getting older, 21, 22, I was trying to think to myself, like, well, eventually I'm going to want to get married. I'm going to want to have a family. And, what kind of a household do I want to have? I was finding that to the extent that you could, as a Noahide Torah study, for instance, was something that was very important to me. I was internalizing, I think, a lot of the ethics and values and beliefs of Judaism. It was an important part of basically who I was and in terms of how I approached the world. And I couldn't see myself going back to how things were before then. And I began to fear that, if I met somebody like, non-Jewish world, a woman who didn't share the same beliefs that I did and made a decision to get involved in a marriage with her, that maybe a lot of these things that I felt that I had that were so wonderful would perhaps start to go by the wayside. And if anything, I want to intensify and deepen my connection to Judaism, to Torah. And so it was around the age of 22 that 23, I officially decided to go through the conversion process. I converted with the Beis Din in Toronto. I think you told me that your father sat on the Beis Din. Yeah, and so that was, I guess, towards the end of my third year or middle of my third year in med school that I converted. And afterwards, I, in discussion with some people in the Buffalo Jewish community, Vladimir Zelenko, some people may know him. His name has come up in the news in the past year. He was actually a medical student at the University of Buffalo. And I sort of took his advice to heart. He regards very important to try to get some yeshiva experience in. He himself had been a Baal Tshuva, and so he recommended Hadar Torah where he had attended, and so I enrolled in Hadar Torah for a year after I graduated from medical school, and that's it was during that year when we were in Crown Heights that I met Rivka.
So Rivka, tell us about that.
So for me, I was in college. I was in my last year, actually my last semester. And I did not convert through Chabad, but there was this little Chabad shul that was about a 45-minute walk from my apartment. And I just didn't feel, I hopped around to different shuls here and there. I didn't really feel like I quite fit in. Everybody was very friendly, but I just didn't quite fit into anyone. And I wandered into this little shul in Cleveland Heights. I didn't have any idea what I was getting into. I walked in and it was loud and there was Russian being spoken and it was wonderfully overwhelming. And I sat down and a woman in front of me just turned around and just introduced herself. And she said, "Hi, I'm Lois Hohen. Do you have a place for lunch?" or something to that effect. And I said, I would love to come to your house for lunch. And they became my Jewish family. And I ended up going to their house every single Shabbat. I would walk down 45 minutes to this little shul and be with my Jewish family. And they eventually did encourage me, Rivka, you probably should get some seminary experience. I was hearing that from a lot of people. Like, you should probably get a little experience under your belt, some formal learning, even though as a convert, they really put you through the ringer. It's not easy to convert. Rabbis make it on purpose. And I understand why, very difficult to convert, but still there's nothing that can really replace like a formal, I was in college, I had no real responsibility. So this was the time to do it. And so we looked into it and we decided that my family and I should say, I didn't want to go to Israel. I thought that might be a little bit too much of a shock for my family. And so we decided it would be okay if I went to New York. Now, they didn't know I was going to drop out of college right then, but they thought it was sometime in the future I was going to do this. I said, okay, great. And I signed the dotted line and I dropped out of college, much to their shock. And I took off for Brooklyn, New York. And I was in Makon Chana, which is a seminary geared more towards returnees to Judaism. And I was there for a year. And I ended up working for Beis Rivka in Crown Heights. I was a teacher, and it was a phenomenal year, an absolutely amazing year. But I didn't meet him. I was still there, and I was getting ready to my second year. I was starting to think maybe I need to move on. This isn't going to be for me. I still wouldn't, I felt very at home. I felt very welcome. I felt wonderful about it, but I thought maybe there's something else out there for me. And that was when several people started saying, hey, I think I've got this guy who might be good for you. And I thought, no, I'm going to college. At that point, I think I had either gotten into Columbia or I was applying to Columbia. I'm going to college. I don't need a guy right now. And then another person would say, no, I think I found a guy for you. And then my Jewish mom back home said, I think I have a guy for you. Yeah. And it turns out it was him every single time. Everybody was saying, this guy is for you. And I said, all right, fine. Okay. I've been so fortunate because despite being oftentimes a very stubborn person and almost kind of like refusing to see things that are right in front of me, I've had the most amazing people who have always surrounded me. And that's one of the things that was really telling me, this is the direction you need to go in, because every time I turned around, there was another amazing person who was nudging me in a direction. So that, you know what, that's worked out so far. All these people just seem to know what's best for me. And so I thought, I'll go on a date with this guy. What's it going to hurt, right? And that was it. It was, we went on several dates, but I knew pretty early on that this is the guy I wanted.
I think we, kicked it off very well. I think we had a lot of commonalities, even though I think as we both sort of described, our sort of trajectory towards Judaism was somewhat different. I do think that there was a lot of commonality that we shared, I think, just in terms of how we approach life. Not necessarily saying that this has to be an indication of anything, but we very frequently, even now, do have this sort of completing each other's sentences sort of thing, or kind of uncanny sort of tendency, like say when a thought comes to mind, and then I was going to say that, etc. But I thought that our dates were very enjoyable. I mean, there were even times I recall it's like the second or third date. Like say there was one that was totally, I guess you could say, it was a total botch job. Like I had intended to go someplace with you, but I wasn't from New York, and so I didn't really know how to use the subway system. And so we were talking, kind of got lost in conversation, totally missed a stop. But like our repeated attempts to actually, or at least my attempt to sort of rewrite our course and get us to our destination, it failed miserably.
I think we saw 4 out of the four boroughs on that day, just like going from train stops.
And we completed it in the end, like say, at some restaurant, but even though in the back of my mind, I was just like, geez, this is like really horrible. Like you really sort of like, botched this up. I found it was like still a very pleasant date. I mean, we were talking and laughing and having a good time.
How long have you both been married now at this point?
So I think we're going on 17 years now.
17 years. So 17 years this June.
And you have children?
We have 4 children. Our oldest is Raphael. He just turned 16 yesterday. And then we have Maya, who 14. Is 14. Thank you. And then underneath Maya is Gary Gersh. Yeah. And he's 10. And then our youngest is Ben. Benjamin. He is 7, going to be 8 in the fall.
And what is it like raising your children as converts? How does it feel? Is there any unique challenges that you feel that the children are presented with?
I will tell you that first off, before anything, a lot of people want to know how we've been accepted. We have been nothing but accepted by the communities. I understand that we can only speak for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't speak for anybody else, but we have been nothing but warmly accepted by the communities.
I'm going to just state the obvious. You're not only converts, but we're also talking about a biracial couple. So
Right.
have there been any ramifications or insensitivities or things like that you've experienced?
I think so. I mean, I think that overall we've been, we've been very well accepted. And I don't think either Rivka or myself are particularly hypersensitive people either. So I don't have like sort of a precondition in my mind. If I'm going to meet some random person, I'm going to expect everybody to be sort of this warm and sort of effusive person. But all that being said, in terms of the close relationships that we have found, and even just kind of like casual relationships in the Jewish community, people that we see in shul, we haven't had any problems in that regard.
And how did you create an extended family for your children?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of challenges that a two-convert household would experience, although I know that to some degree, Baal Teshuvahs may have some of their own challenges as well. You have to try as much as possible to position them in a community where there is really a very warm, extended family kind of a feel.
And we live in a very small community. We live in Rochester, New York, and the Orthodox community is small, and we're tight-knit. Mm-hmm. There's 4 Orthodox shuls here. It's small. We all kind of live basically in the same, basically 5 same streets, And because of that, we have friends who are from birth. We have friends who are Baal Teshuvah. We have friends who are converts. And we all kind of look out for each other. That is very clear. So I do have to say that, the community that we have landed in has been tremendously supportive. We might not have had the same experience in another community, I can't say. Right. One thing that I do think we do have a challenge with, our oldest son has mentioned before that he feels very different sometimes. He feels very different from his, and this could very easily be teenage, kind of like hormones and angst, and every teenager feels awkward.
I hear from my teenagers all the time.
But he sometimes feels different from everybody else because we are a biracial couple, or because we are both converts. And we are very, very fortunate, or I should say, especially I'm very fortunate, Shalom has been able to pick up language very, very easily. So he's been able to help the kids with the homework. I don't pick up languages so easy, so I break my teeth on Hebrew. He has picked it up very well. So he can sit down and study Gemara with our sons. He can sit down and study Chumash with our daughter and things like that, whereas I wouldn't be able to do that. So in that respect, we do have, we do sometimes feel a deficiency, because if he can't help, I can't. And that's probably not so different than a lot of Baal Teshuvah couples. Another thing that sometimes we feel a little bit of pain, and again, when I say a little bit of pain, it's nothing that's really like tearing our hearts out, but it's a little sting when there are things like any kind of like fundraising thing where the kids are expected to have aunts and uncles and cousins pledge money for however many Tehillim a kid says or whatever. And we don't have that. We don't have that family network to really kind of lean on. So that's a little bit of a sting, or when there's grandparents' day at school, and that's when we probably feel the difference the most. But again, it's not like it's breaking our hearts. We're like, okay, kids, like, we're different, all right? Like, it's all right. We say to our son, like, if you go to Israel, you'll see Jews of every color. No one would even notice you, So it's not that, even the things that might make us feel a little awkward are barely blips on the radar screen, to be perfectly honest.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, there are... it's definitely becoming apparent to us, though, in observing other families, that every family situation has its pros and cons. And I think it's important for people to try to capitalize on some of the advantages that they have, and try to deal as best as possible with with some of the deficiencies that they may have. So as Rivka mentioned, it can oftentimes be a case of somebody is a convert or even a Baal Tshuva, since not all Baal Tshuvas have really much in the way of a Hebrew background, that when the kids especially are in school and they need help with homework, or you just want to learn with your children, not everybody's going to be in a position where they can sort of pick up sort of the primary sources and sit and learn with the children. And I am fortunate that I feel that I can do that a fair amount with the kids. And for me, it was important to try to arrive at that level, not just to be able to practically help the kids out with their assignments, but just to be able to have this sort of back and forth conversations with my children that are spiritual in nature, and where you use the Torah as a point of departure. You can sit and learn something together, and that can be used as a springboard to talk about Hashem, to talk about like some aspect of Jewish belief in the world, sort of a Jewish lens. And so for me, that was very important to achieve. But there's some things that being able to go to Bubby and Zadie's, or for Pesach, we don't have that.
Sure.
On the other hand, I was fortunate, not that all converts or Baal Tshuvas are in this situation, that as a physician, I do have the means to sort of help the children financially, supplement aspects of their education in ways that if I was more hard up, I guess, for financially, I wouldn't be able to do. So we try to give our kids a well-rounded education. We try to help fund and finance some extracurricular activities that I think are probably easier to do here in an inexpensive city like Rochester than maybe in some major Jewish communities. Sometimes having a perspective of somebody who came to Judaism from the outside, sometimes I think the children can find that enlightening, but not always. I mean, it depends on, I think, where they are in sort of their development. As Rivka was mentioning, with our oldest son, although sometimes I think he finds that refreshing, there are other times where he might feel like, geez, wouldn't it be nice to come from this family that has a yichus all the way back, that looks like my Zadie was a Rosh Hashiva, et cetera, et cetera, but we know families in that situation and know that having that situation, while there are wonderful aspects, so it doesn't automatically mean that everything is going to be easy, and we try to, without getting into details about the lives of other families, also try to impress that onto children too, that you have to understand that everybody has to deal with certain blessings in their life and certain challenges. And it's a mistake to sort of think that you're the only person that is dealing with challenges that may sometimes even seem major. I mean, people, that's just a part of being a human being.
Absolutely.
I also think it's
I think that's a great perspective, by the way, and I think as your children get older, they're going to look at you as people who chose this as their way of life with such an earnestness and such a sincerity that's going to impress them. There was a reason why my parents chose this.
right.
And if I'm not feeling it, maybe I need to look deeper into why it is that they chose that.
Right. And I say to our son, you might not have some great Rosh Hashiva in your background somewhere, no great grandfather or something. I said, so you get to be one. You get to be that foundation. Maybe your destiny is that you are going to be the foundation of a family that in 10 generations they'll look back and they'll say, oh, well, my great whatever Rafi was this person. So there are these unseen benefits to almost starting with a clean slate. Like it's a tremendous responsibility. It's not just we're having kids, but we're laying the foundations, hopefully, of generations to come, generations of Jews to come. And so that's a pretty heavy burden. And not that we're certainly not complaining, but maybe the perspective should be more like, what can I build from this? What can I build on this? Rather than lamenting what's not been built for us.
Mm-hmm.
And, all of our kids are very different. We have 4 very unique individuals, and how they ended up coming to be from 2 parents is, it's crazy. You just, but each kid has their own sensitivities. And so what might be a big deal for our oldest, I don't think our daughter even seems to really notice. I think our daughter actually kind of gets a kick out of it. I think she thinks it's kind of cool to be like, well, I'm the odd one out, so it's definitely not something that, like I say, even though it might kind of feel like it could be a burden or a challenge, it really isn't. It's hard work, but it's not it's not something we're shying away from or lamenting or feeling cheated out of or anything like that.
And being in a small community, and the small versus medium versus large communities have different dynamics too. And although the Rochester community is large enough, I think, to sort of have all the basic amenities. One advantage is it's rather difficult to feel truly like an odd person out when you're in a class of 7 kids, and that's the other thing too. I mean, it's one thing if you're in some huge community, right, and the overwhelming majority of people maybe fit some, at least in your mind, some pre-specified mold, and you're like the one person out of 100 that's but when you're one person out of 7, and not even that, I mean, because like as Rivka mentioned, we have people we have in our community, people who are sending children to the school that our children go to, who themselves are converts or Bali Tshuva. It's a fairly mixed community, and so I think for all the kind of like the misgivings that every once in a while our son might mention, I don't think that our children are really in a position where they're going to socially feel like outsiders as much as they might in a different situation. But like I said, I think we're anyway trying to raise them with a healthy outlook regarding these things. So I'd like to think that even if we're in a much larger community, that our basic approach would still be helpful to them.
Yeah, it's a beautiful approach. Absolutely. Tell us about yourself personally. Are there certain mitzvot that you were more drawn to? Are there certain commandments that you feel are more difficult to embrace along your journey?
So, I mean, so for me, the mitzvahs that really help to sort of regenerate, I guess, my batteries, so to speak. So Torah study is a major part. I am, very much into, learning on a daily basis, but also incorporating Hasidus virtually on a daily basis into my learning. So I think that's a very...
Explain to us, like, what you feel about Hasidus enhances your life, like what part of it, to those who might not be studying it or might not know that much about it.
Yeah. So, I guess I have to be a little bit careful, like say, or at least kind of like politically correct in the sense that when you talk of the virtues of Hasidus, I think it's important to emphasize that, yes, you can find a lot of these things, or the positive elements of Hasidus in Jewish observance in general. But I do think that Hasidus came to draw out or really help Jews and sort of later generations, now that we're hoping that we're approaching Mashiach times, that Hasidus sort of came as sort of a shot in the arm. So for me, I think Hasidus is the study of Hasidus, but also some of the practices that Hasidim have adopted in their communities are a very potent way of really enhancing a person's Ahavas Hashem, Yiras Hashem, the person's sense of their emotional connection with Hashem.
I think that and on awe of God. Let's just translate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So of course, the basic Chabad approach, although it shares a lot of commonalities with other Hasidic groups, but Chabad, I think, is especially well known for trying to take essentially Kabbalistic concepts, but trying to present them in a way that can be digestible for people that are not sort of elite scholars, whereas, in prior generations before the Baal Shem Tov, usually the people that were very much involved in sort of mystical aspects or Judaism were these sort of more like rare or elite scholars. It was really pretty much a closed book to approach these sort of these ideas and concepts. And so I think with the Baal Shem Tov and the Chabad approach in particular, an approach was created where really a lot of these ideas, to a very deep and profound degree, were set forth in a way using sort of a language and a way of describing to people who are, I guess, more average people, what these concepts mean, what the significances of them are, I think with the idea of helping a more average person be able to reflect on them, and the hope that in so doing that it would help a person reveal his latent love for Hashem. And I guess, the second thing with Hasidus is that, I guess is connected to the first, is just I find that the study of it for me, enhances this feeling of like Hashem in the world. You look at a world where it's very easy to conclude that there's no God, or let's say God is absent. And I feel that, yes, Jewish practices in general, I think, are designed to foster a kind of divine consciousness, even in mundane activities. But I think Hasidus intensifies that. I think it is a very potent force in terms of enhancing that kind of perspective in life. So for me, it's been very important in that regard. But Torah study in general, I don't want to take up too much time. I guess the second thing is that although davening, I'm not going to say something that comes very easy to me. I do try every once in a while to take a page out more like the Breslover handbook, and so to take time out also to have personal conversations with Hashem. Mm-hmm. And I find it periods in my life where I actually make a regular practice of that also have a very powerful and positive impact on my life. I guess before talking about any challenges, though, I want to give Rivka a chance to talk.
So I will start actually with the challenging thing. What has always been the most challenging, I guess, aspect of Judaism for me has been, and it's weird that it's also probably one of my favorite things, is Shabbat. My mind is always going a million miles an hour in about 10,000 different directions, and it's very hard to slow down and stop. I'm also, I love making art, and it's hard, to suddenly say there's this hard line at 5:52. I cannot touch a pencil, or I cannot, pick up a paintbrush, and it's really hard. It's very hard to train myself, even after doing that. I converted Orthodox 20 years ago, and it's still really hard for me to accept that I have to kind of like corral myself and be disciplined. I'm very much a person who does not like to be told what to do. And so when I'm told you cannot draw, you cannot do this, you have limitations, you have restrictions, my natural instinct is to kind of bristle at it. But ironically, I enjoy Shabbat so much because it does slow me down, and because it does force me to kind of like reset the meter, so to speak. So I spend my Shabbat with my family. I go and visit friends, and we just talk. We just sit around and talk, and we reconnect. And it is the biggest, most amazing thing to have, to reconnect just with humans. I think we miss so much when we don't speak face to face with people. And Shabbat allows me to be face to face with people, even if we're not having a deep, meaningful conversation, even if we're not, solving the world's problems over coffee. It is just wonderful to just exist with them. So on the one hand, it's very difficult for me, but on the other hand, it is something that gives me tremendous, such a shot in the arm. It's like a vitamin shot. I've also kind of like Shalom has always been quietly studying Hasidus, and I admit that I went away from it for a while. For a long time, I didn't really see a benefit to it for myself. A while being like 16 years. And I am very fortunate that I finally came to the conclusion that there was something missing in my Judaism. There was something, my Judaism was more about duty. It was like, I do this because I'm a Jew, and that's the end of it. And it doesn't matter if I'm enjoying it, and it doesn't matter if I'm getting anything out of it. I do it because I'm a Jew. That was really kind of the backbone of my Judaism. And eventually, after all these years, relatively recently, I kind of said, there has to be something more than this. Like, there has to be something more. And so I reached out to my rabbi, and he responded, and he said, start learning Hasidus. Just start doing it. Start with Shalom. Start learning with Shalom. And we did a little bit. And now I'm taking, I listen in on online classes, like pre-recorded stuff, because I'm listening at like 3:00 in the morning when the children are actually asleep and the house is quiet. And that has been a really, positive development in my life. I don't think maybe I wasn't in the headspace for it until now. Now I'm in the headspace for it as a parent, as somebody who is looking at my children, and I'm like, okay, I have to transmit this to them. And I can't transmit how much I love Judaism because my children are not converts. My children are born Jewish. So they're almost completely different animals than I am. how do I transmit Judaism to them? How can I do that if I don't have joy in it, if I don't have this like spark of life? And so I've reconnected with studying Hasidus, and I don't always find it easy. I still have a streak in me that's very much like, no, I don't have to do that. But I'm trying very hard, and it has done tremendous things. I think it has kind of reawakened a love of Judaism that maybe had gotten a little dull over the years. So I will hand it to Shalom for what he finds hard.
That's beautiful, Rivka. Really beautiful.
Thank you.
And just before Shalom, and Rivka, you expressed all of this so beautifully also in your article that you wrote for us on your first trip to that not the first, one of your trips to the Ohel of the Rebbe, where you expressed how you just felt this overpowering emotion.
Right.
It was really
when I lived, right, I'm sorry. You know, when I lived in Crown Heights, we ended up living in Crown Heights, me 3 years, Shalom for 2 years. I went to the Ohel almost every Wednesday. That was my recentering thing. That was like, okay, this is how I'm going to recenter myself. Because I tend to have like a very chaotic, like thought process, a very chaotic brain. That recentered me. That allowed me to kind of get my footing again. But I never really felt anything. To me, it was a very selfish thing. It was me going to reconnect. But when I went recently and I wrote about it in the article, that was really the first time that I really felt like, okay, I'm here for a reason. I'm here to ask for help. I'm here to be like, I'm a little lost right now. But thank you. I really do appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's beautiful. We want more, Rivka. We want more.
I mean, in terms of difficulties, some of these things are probably just, day-to-day Judaism. I don't think that Hashem designed life in general for people, but Judaism in particular to be easy. So the reality is that if you're going to grow as a person, there are times when that process of growth may be very pleasant and you may be experiencing inspirational feelings, but also there are times when you may be annoyed and you don't really want to do what you know that you have to do, and so you have to face an inner struggle against your desire to do something else. So I guess towards that end is sort of basic day to day. I'm not someone who bounces out of bed, like in the morning. I mean, the Chabad ideal, especially. I mean, Jewish ideal is to get up and make shachris if you're a man, and et cetera, et cetera. But Chabad ideal is not just do that, but you go to mikvah and learn Hasidus, and bonin, and then and it's I'm not somebody who bounces out, just jumps out of bed and it's like, thank you, Hashem, for being alive. That's not me. I wish it was, but it's not.
Sure, for a lot of us.
Yeah. Similarly, like the fast days, I usually on the fast days, I don't feel contrite. Like fasting doesn't make me feel contrite and more inclined to look at, how there are things in my life that I can maybe correct. I just feel annoyed. And so, I still do that, but it's not something that I connect with. And I think that just overall, and I imagine this is just a Jewish experience in general, is that there's, especially as a Jew, there's any number of things that you can think about or reflect on in your life, and you say, I can do this better. Let's say the Jewish ideal is to do this a certain way, and yet I have so many things on my plate that there are times when I'm asking, well, what does Hashem want from me? So on the one hand, my line of work involved a lot of study, a lot of hours. It's still very demanding. But at the same time, I had to sort of, by the way, try to pick up Hebrew and Aramaic and in order to function as best as I could in a Jewish community for myself, but for the children,
Right.
And in spite of having to jump through all those hoops, you can still always think, well, there's this I can do, this is, this I can do, there's always more tzedakah you can give, and so that can at times be frustrating because it's nice to just kind of say, well, can I just take a break, take a breather from me? And you do. I mean, you have Shabbat. I don't want to say that I'm always on the go or feeling that I'm behind the 8 ball or something like that, but there are definitely times when you can feel that way, where you come home and you're like, well, this child needs help with this child needs help with it. Oh, I just got paged, You know, somebody knocking on my door, like say they want to talk about, like say there was somebody, like say, you know, came to my door like 2 days ago, wanted the same thing. Oh, this person, like say from our school that I'm already paying a lot of money in tuition for, wants me to give a massive donation that I don't have. You know, I mean, these sort of things that, I mean, it's just sort of a byproduct, I think, of being a Jew. Yes, being a Jew in the United States, where like the reality of tuition payments is something that we all have to face, and so. You know, and you do your best. I mean, Hashem did not design life to be easy. That's just the way it is. You know, if you're going to grow as a Jew, you have to accept that even under good circumstances, and you know, we are, I think, blessed to be in good circumstances here at this point. You know, in the U.S., many of us at least. But still, that entails a certain amount of struggle. You have to be very mindful of what you're doing, and you could always improve, and that can feel, you know, overwhelming, but you also have to, you know, learn to appreciate the value of what you are actually doing, what you are actually, you know, accomplishing.
Right. Well, I guess if you realize like everything that you've done or that you're doing is so amazing, you know, you just want to keep on doing even more of that, because everyone wants more happiness in their life, right?
Right.
Yeah. I want to touch for a moment, because time is running so quickly. This is such an inspirational story. But can you tell us a little about, I know, Rivka, you're an artist, and I heard, Shalom, you were into music. Can you tell us a little about your artistic self? How do you find individuality and expressing of your individuality or your talents in Judaism when there are so many structures and, you know, laws about what you can and can't do?
Well, you know, there are certain things that are off limits when it comes to art. Like, you know, I don't see myself signing up to draw nude models anytime soon. So that's definitely a no-go. But that's not really a restriction that's really bothered me. I briefly attended art school. I didn't know what I was going to do with myself after high school, and the only place that would take me was art school. I really had no intentions of becoming like a professional artist or anything, but art was something that was always present in our home. My mother is very, very artistic, and so there were always art supplies laying around. She's always making stained glass or doing something. So it's always kind of been in my life just to sit and draw, sit and do some. You're feeling stressed, make a picture. You know, you're feeling happy, make a picture. You know, so it's something I kind of grew up with. So it's something I don't even really think about. Now I do, ever since I started listening to like Hasidus classes online, I'm a doodler. Like, I can't just sit and listen. It's very hard for me to sit and listen. My brain starts wandering. I'm like halfway to Mars in 5 minutes. So I started a little sketchbook. And so I just sit and I sketch while I'm listening to these classes. And it's become almost kind of like I'm not going to say therapeutic, but it's calming. And it allows me to focus. And it's kind of become its own thing. Like, I feel like, oh, I gotta do my drawing tonight. I gotta listen to my class tonight. And I'm almost a little bit sad when a drawing gets completed, because that's usually when a class is getting completed. But we've been fortunate. I know we talk about this a lot. We've been fortunate that in this community where we are, it's very come as you are. So even though, you know, I probably march to my own beat a little bit, I've never been made to feel different or less valued. And so I teach art at the girls' high school, and in the summertime, my house is open for women to come, you know, to take an art class with me. I'll do a 3-day, you know, drawing class with the adult women of the community. I do private lessons, you know, a lot of times I do it for free, just because I enjoy the company. I enjoy people coming in, and I enjoy the conversation. So that's one way that I've kind of incorporated it really into my day-to-day life. It's something that is really much a part of me. And it's something that allows me to focus, and it's something that it brings an extra layer of joy. And as it is, our daughter, Maya, is very also inclined that way. She's very much a doodler and a maker and a painter and a drawer. And so, you know, I see a lot of myself and a lot of my mother in her. And so we are a very, you know, open household when it comes to that. We have art supplies just all over the place. And it's seen, I try to tell my kids that it's a good way to express your feelings. So it's a way to express yourself. And, you know, there's never been any kind of conflict at all for us.
That's great.
Yeah, so when I was in college, part of my degree was piano performance. So I played pretty intensively throughout my college years, mainly classical music, and for me it was a very serious involvement. And I have maintained it a fair amount. I mean, there were some periods of time in med school, when I didn't really have time. I didn't have a piano for a couple of years, and during residency training. For me, it's largely a personal hobby, but one that I may integrate at some point into Jewish communal life. Like I said, I'm quite busy right now with other things, but I've been studying for a few years.
We're fortunate that your pager didn't go off, Shalom.
Yeah. I've been studying with a jazz pianist for a few years in my neighborhood, and so that has taught me a bit more about improvising and sort of learning pieces by ear, which I think is a bit more a type of training that's more useful for picking up sort of Jewish tunes and kind of like the Kumsitz kind of an atmosphere. I mean, there's a rabbi in the area that's very keen on that, and is actually trying to sort of start more of an initiative that even though he's not a Lubavitcher, he does have very sort of, shall we say, strong Hasidic leanings, and likes to tries to see if he can set up farbrangans. And I may, he plays a guitar, I may start accompanying him. But for me, it's largely just sort of like a private creative pursuit. It's one way that I have of trying to maintain some degree of balance in my life. If I sit down and I'm learning a tune or improvising, or even like writing something on my own, it is a way of basically just maybe stress relief. But it's creative pursuits are, I think, a wonderful way of introducing, I think, a bit of balance into your life and being able to kind of take a step back.
Sure.
So I'm very fortunate to have that in my life.
So I just want to, we're running out of time, but I just want to ask you, I mean, so much has changed in your life in the last 20 years. Can you complete the sentence for me? In another 20 years, I'd like to see myself as, or my family as.
Israeli.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Living in Israel with lots of Jewish grandchildren.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah, so that's I think really has increasingly been our goal, with lots of Jewish grandchildren. And I remember back in Hadar Torah with the Mashpia there, where he was talking about the Rebbe, and he kind of used this mushal where he's basically saying how important it was for the Rebbe really to have everybody in his wagon, so to speak, in terms of trying to inspire Jews to be on board with, like Torah and mitzvahs, and to not fear sort of the challenges that you face in life. That it's okay. Hashem loves you, and everybody get into the Rebbe's wagon. So to a much smaller degree, that's I think how I like to look at my children. For of course our children are going to grow up and be their own people and have to make their decisions about how they want to approach life, how they want to approach Judaism. But our goal is to really try to make them or position themselves to be as good and fulfilled Jews as they possibly can be, and to contribute in their own unique way to the Jewish people, to the world, to serve Hashem with their unique strengths. But for me, it's also everybody being in Abba's wagon, so to speak. For me to focus on each of my children as individuals and try to see what special qualities they have to really try to nurture and bring out. So hopefully, yes, we're hoping to, God willing, one day be making Aliyah to Israel, and of course, we would like our children to be there with us and developing our lives and families together over there.
Right, beautiful. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining. I know you're both busy leading busy lives, productive lives, and with especially your special children. Thank you so much for the inspiration that you've given us. This is Rivka and Shalom Chilangu, and thank you for these words of wisdom that you've provided us in terms of giving us a perspective of what it means to join the Jewish people, and the inspiration that you continue to have. And I bless you that you should have all the wishes that your heart wants for your children, for yourself, and for our world, that we should all very soon see that happen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for
All right.
joining us. Thank you.